Politics, finance, art, culture, world affairs, it's all so lame. Why? Renaissance man Michael Anton is here to tell you the answer. I'm James Poulos. This is Zero Hour. Michael Anton is the Jack Roth Senior Fellow at the Claremont Institute and secondarily a lecturer at Hillsdale. He previously served as a former national security official in the Trump administration and as a speechwriter for Pete Wilson, Rudy Giuliani, and George W. Bush. He's the author of The Flight 93 Election and Toward a Sensible, Coherent Trumpism, among many books which we will discuss. Welcome, Michael. How are you?
Good, thanks.
All right, so what is happening in this world? Who is in charge and why does it all suck so much?
Yeah. I don't know who's in charge, and I suspect that nobody is. So this is like a perennial question that we debate. You and I debate it. Many of our friends debate it. I debate it with colleagues, right? So we're both, right? We're both trained to be political scientists. The fundamental question of political science is who rules and to what end? And I can actually answer the second half of that more easily than I can answer the first half. I'm a political scientist, and I can't tell you who the sovereign is or who's in charge. I know what the parchment says. I know what the theory of the United States says, but I don't see that in operation. You know it's not Joe Biden, right? Is Joe Biden in charge? So then people want to say, well, it's the chief of staff. I can't even name the current chief of staff. It was this Ron Klain, Washington fixture, but he's gone and replaced with some dude. I don't even know who it is anymore. Right, but then these bureaucrats have all this power. But then so do corporate CEOs, and so do tech lords, and so do foundation presidents, and university presidents, and in a way, even faculty, although less than administrators. But power is diffuse, it's distributed in today's world. And so my working hypothesis, and it's working because our friend and critic Tom West, who never lets me get away with anything. So he says that he's not convinced by my notion that the actual sovereign is a kind of doctrine, a hive mind doctrine that everybody follows and they know how to follow. But I haven't heard anything better yet. Tom thinks that there is some power, but when we try to identify, well, who is it? Exactly, who are these people? Is there a conference room where they meet? I mean, Davos, I guess, sort of, but once a year getting together in Davos for 5 days. I think that sets the tone for what the hive mind believes. That sets authoritative opinion or helps cement it. But I don't think those people are actually running things from that institution. They're all very powerful, so they go back and they run things from their own institution. But why does everybody always agree on everything? That's the question. Then the analogy that I've used before is like a flock of birds. We've all seen it. They just all of a sudden all turn at the same time.
The murmuration.
Yeah. And there is no bird in front saying, okay, go left, right? At least we don't know, we don't think so. But somehow they know, right? And the hive is like that. The last time I saw the hive confused was at the very beginning of COVID, when it didn't know, are we gonna play this down? Because remember that in the early days it was, this is not a thing, you don't need masks. And also Nancy Pelosi was saying, go have dinner in Chinatown.
Because you are a racist if you don't go to your local wet market.
Yeah, if you don't go to Chinatown, you're a racist, right? And then it took them about 4 to 6 weeks to figure out, no, we're gonna make this into a huge deal and do
Fauci was
lockdowns.
don't put on a mask, this is a waste of time.
And so on and so forth. It didn't quite know what to do. But once it coalesced, once it became clear that the hive thinks the following, now we're still with it. Now we're hearing right now, I don't know when this will air or be available, but it's early September 2023, and we're hearing kind of rumblings that, well, maybe they're gonna bring mask mandates back because of variant X or whatever. Now I think that's gonna go down a lot less easily than it did last time. I also think you're gonna see, if they try to do that, a lot more bifurcation between, let's just say, red and blue parts of the United States. I also think certain countries in Europe, Hungary started out, Hungary is supposedly the conservative, or the left-wing boogeyman country, right? They're very illiberal and so on. I've been there a couple times. I'm actually going back twice this fall, so I like it.
That's
clearly.
very illiberal of you.
Right. But they had a really strict COVID policy in the early days, surprising for a country that is supposed to be so outside the mainstream of managerial, administrative state neoliberal opinion. But then the Orban government fairly early realized this isn't working and it's stupid, and they dropped all of it. So I think you could see that bifurcation maybe in Europe if it comes back, more authoritarian countries, Unfortunately, Britain has become one more authoritarian. I didn't say authoritarian necessarily, but even countries that you think of as having super nanny states, like Sweden, went the other way and never locked down. So I think if they try to do it again, you're going to see more of a split, both in the United States and in the West more broadly, and that may kind of disturb the hive mind, or it'll be the places where the hive mind has the least power will do the least COVID.
Yeah, well, it's becoming like a lifestyle choice now, where people are like, I just like it better that way. I feel safer, and I wear the mask. And
Yeah, it's a signifier.
You can opt in, and if you get enough people to opt in, then are you really going to be?
If you fly a lot, which I know you do and I do,
Yeah.
right? You will see that there's just some dead enders who are going to wear masks on planes and in airports forever.
Yeah.
I would guesstimate it at under 20%, but that's not nothing when you think about how many people are flying.
There are sometimes those flights where it's like the dead of winter, and everyone's like hacking up a lung when you're on there, and I just zip myself up into a bag if I could, just to survive without having to come down with a head cold. But I think you're right. Like there is this disorganization, but there is this kind of concerted movement, whether you want to call it the swarm or the hive or whatever. And the best analogy that I can think of is like medieval times, when you had like Christendom, and then you had like zillions of different principalities and monarchies and kind of all these different kinds of regimes. Everyone's sort of scrambling and trying to figure out what to do. That period of time doesn't get a lot of attention from political philosophy, unless you're talking about our Catholic monarchist friends out there who are like, no, this is the key that explains it all. It didn't really seem relevant at all until kind of tech washed through everything and is kind of changing the configurations. Does political philosophy sort of give us a window into that kind of crazy quilt moment?
As you know, I spend lots of time studying Machiavelli, and he's criticizing that exact notion. Like, his view is Christianity, and I always have to preface this by saying, I'm just summarizing him. I'm not endorsing this, because, Christian, when you explain what he's doing, there's always going to be some Christian in your audience who thinks that you're attacking their faith.
Do you stand with Machiavelli?
Why do you read this? But I just find it interesting, and also he has a good sense of humor. That he thinks Christianity is both too unifying and not unifying enough, right? It allows for this division between Pope and Emperor, between peoples and princes, but do you follow your local priest, or do you follow your local baron or whatever? But then too much of a unity where there's this doctrine that should apply to everything and that is the ultimate judge of what's right and what's wrong. And Machiavelli thinks that has stifled philosophy, and part of his aim, I think, is to liberate philosophy, what he thinks is theological supervision or even theological imprisonment. And maybe we do face something like that again. I mean, I wrote for you a couple of years ago that there are striking parallels between Machiavelli's criticism of his time and our time, that we do have a kind of stultifying doctrine. If he was worried about the institutional church and the monasteries, our monasteries are the universities. That's where the doctrine is cooked and baked and set, okay? And to some extent promulgated, but then there's a network of distribution platforms downstream, if you will, from the universities that make sure the doctrine gets out there. Machiavelli would say, and I think does say indirectly in Prince chapter 13, that the priests are a kind of auxiliary army, they're in the service of the Pope or of the doctrine, not in the service of the sovereigns of their countries. I'd say that's sort of true of university faculty, but also the opinion making and the opinion enforcing classes. I mean, I don't know, I don't want to tick off any of your friends or people that but what is the purpose of Vox.com or these explainer sites? They're enforcers of doctrine in the same way that the priests in the medieval times were like, this is what you're supposed to believe, this is a heresy, and just do what I say and believe what I say. It's kind of eerily similar.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, usually when we have these debates about neo-feudalism or whatever, it's like there are the serfs, and then there are the nobles, and there's nothing in the middle, and that's why it sucks. But it's a lot more complicated than that. You have all these petty fiefdoms, and sort of everyone's kind of jockeying around, and some people, alliances are shifting, and all the real conflicts are kind of settled, behind the curtain or behind the scenes. In some ways, kind of like mafia culture. The lack of a strong sovereign in many cases, or a really compromised sovereign. From the standpoint of an Orthodox Christian, right? A lot of these guys would actually just sort of look at the Western Europe that you described and laugh, right? Where it's like, well, there was never supposed to be a pope. It was supposed to be sort of really disaggregated religious authority. You have these different patriarchates, and no one is really challenging the emperor. No one's trying to be the emperor. They will check the emperor when the emperor starts to say things like, well, won this Pyrrhic victory over the Persians for the umpteenth time in Byzantium, and so I'm just going to canonize everyone who died in that battle. And then the patriarch, well, no, you're not going to do that. And there are those kinds of frictions. But it wasn't really the kind of situation that you had unfold in the West, where yes, the Pope did have temporal power.
Yeah.
And then you have someone like Henry VIII come along and say, well, now I'm the Pope, but just of England. And you can see this thing sort of start to like fracture and fragment, and it's just reaction after reaction. You got Luther, and you've got Zwingli, and you got all these other Protestants coming along. And we, the West, were kind of thrown in this trajectory that is still not really resolved itself. You still have a camp of people who are like, it should be the union of temporal and spiritual authority, whether it's an Anglican model or a Catholic model. Then you got the folks, well, no, it's got to be like the Anabaptists, like we just keep making it up every generation, and it's only adult baptism, and you can't raise your kids the way you want to because adults have to make choices for themselves. And then, yes, the monasteries are thrown out, and then we have these sort of fake monasteries that replace them. It does seem like we're kind of stuck in this kind of loop, and whether that's because Christianity had some issues in the West, or because we inherited this kind of structure, and then the elites come in and they say, well, we're going to keep the structure, but we're going to junk the church. And I think it was like Nietzsche's quote, it is the church, but not its poison that repels us. That was like one of his aphorisms.
I mean, Machiavelli would say that the problem begins with Christianity itself. Well, it actually begins before Christianity. It begins with the Roman conquest of the ancient world, that you no longer have independent states, independent polises. I don't even know what the Greek plural polis is, but roughly translated as city-state. We don't want to go into all the reasons why you're not supposed to translate it as city-state, because that would take too long. But they all get conquered. They all get assimilated into one giant Borg with an emperor, right? And Christianity is only possible, in Machiavelli's analysis, once the ancient world is unified. And basically, millions of people become disenfranchised, where you're conquered by the Romans. You don't have an independent civic authority. You don't have status as a citizen. I mean, many people did, but most in the Roman Empire didn't. And a god comes along and appeals to you specifically on the basis of your disenfranchisement and weakness, and it's very appealing, right? And that god says, I recognize that you, my followers, don't have temporal power, and I don't offer you temporal power. I offer you spiritual solace in this world and paradise in the next world if you have faith and behave yourselves. We don't have to get into faith not works here either, because that's another theological controversy that is sort of too deep for now. But what it does is it severs the connection between civil and religious law, right? Which in the ancient polis, whether pagan or Jewish, because there's really only one monotheistic ancient polis, and that is ancient Israel, right?
But the gods were the city gods.
The gods are the gods of the city, and the god lays down the law. And there's no distinction between religious and civil law, right? We would say, well, religious law is, for a Catholic, don't eat meat on Fridays, or, observe Lent or something. And civil law is drive on the right side, not the left side of the road. And you could say, well, what about, thou shalt not steal? That's sort of both the Ten Commandments, right? But Christianity recognizes, Roman law only. That's the meaning of that famous passage in the gospel, where somebody asks Jesus, what am I supposed to do about these Romans? Do I pay my taxes or do I not pay my taxes? And he says, pay your taxes, right? That's civil law. Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, render unto God what is God's. I'm not bringing you civil law the way the Jewish tradition does, the way Moses did, and the way the pagans have.
Well, that was the great scandal where they think the Messiah is going to come and raise an army and overthrow the Romans.
Machiavelli says that's a problem that has never been solved. And in fact, more than Machiavelli, I think my teacher, Harry Jaffa, said that this is a problem that modernity was intended to solve, and that the American founding ultimately solved, Harry, well, I shouldn't call him Harry, Professor Jaffa, sorry, thought that it had solved it. We could also debate that for another day, but that was certainly the intention, that this distinction between civil and religious law had to be resolved some way, and the only way was to find a new basis for the rational law, okay? And that was reason in an understanding of the inalienable rights of man, which are created by God, but men have to go and write the law themselves. There's no, we know where U.S. law comes from. It comes from a convention in 1787 and then statutes passed by Congress, right? It does not come from divinely revealed word the same way Moses brings the tablets from Sinai and takes the rest directly from God, or the way Plato begins his dialogue called The Laws, where these three men, an Athenian, a Cretan, and not Cretan as in human ape or whatever, from the island of Crete.
From Crete, please.
And a Spartan all say, yes, all law comes from gods. And they discuss the origin of their laws. Well, it's Zeus or some god specifically speaking to a human or a demigod who then lays down the law, right? That connection has been severed now. And if I may plug a little book by a colleague of ours that's just out that I will be reviewing for the CRB called The Narrow Passage. It's an odd title. I actually don't know what the title necessarily means, but I know what the book means because I've read it. This is Glenn Ulmersh's book, and he basically says this has been since that connection was severed, human kind of political and spiritual existence has been in flux, and no one's figured out a way to kind of repair the rift.
Well, so you have Machiavelli, and then by some accounts, Machiavelli is sort of the birth of modern republicanism, small r republicanism. That's kind of the standard view. But this is a long way from uniting spiritual and temporal power.
Yes.
So how does that tension play out? Where nowadays, America 2023, a lot of the suck seems to be the result of large numbers of people saying, you know what, we just need to basically establish a doctrine, and we need to treat that doctrine as something even higher than sort of like a sort of Lincoln civil religion. You know, this is going to be like, we're going to create a code, a caste system, and basically, and it's going to be a sacred caste system.
And I think that they, I think, number one, those people are sincere. Number two, the people who are saying that probably have a better grasp of the underlying problem than the people who, you know, pose other solutions just kind of within the narrow understanding of modernity or where we are. The problem, as I see it, and Glenn's book gets to this, and we've both been writing about it, and I'll plug now two of my own things. I just reviewed Regime Change by Patrick Deneen for the CRB. It's still paywalled, but eventually, you know, they'll take it out from behind the paywall.
It's a great review. He was on the show not long ago, and I want to hear about it.
I like the guy, but I laid out, I really personally like him. But I laid out, you know, disagreements or just problems. Like, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? And another thing that I just finished writing today, which I get, you know, I've been in a kind of running debate with Paul Gottfried, who's a former, I think he was a history or a philosophy professor. Anyway, he's very well versed in ideas, whether he's a historian or a philosopher and the academic discipline, I don't know.
One of the last living Marcuse students.
He could have been either. I mean, he knows so much about all this stuff. And now he's obviously the editor of Chronicles, a paleo-conservative magazine. So we've been just debating the existence of natural right for about, almost a year now. And it seems like he loves the topic. So whenever I say something, he wants to say something, and I say something, it just goes on and on. So I wrote about this again. Getting back to what you said, I don't think the willing or positing of a code is going to work. The reason why it worked in the ancient world is because the people actually believed. When Moses came down and he said, I got these tablets directly from God, everyone down there believed A, that God really exists, and B, he really did get those tablets from that God. There's nothing fake about this, right? Take nothing away from our integralist friends. They could write the most perfect code imaginable and say, we're going to make this an authoritative code, and it's not going to go anywhere because who's going to accept it, right? Who's going to say, like, wait a minute, you're telling me you, a professor of political philosophy, and you, a law professor, and you, whatever, a priest over here, you guys spoke to God, or you are God? They're just going to laugh. That's what's going to happen.
Well, but this is a code. I mean, we're not talking about the integralists here now. We're talking about you will affirm your child's gender identity, or you will go to jail, or you have your child taken away. You will not defend yourself from theft or robbery or attacks on your home, or else you will go to jail. I mean, he's just going back to Nietzsche. He's like, well, where does memory come from? How does anything stick in a society? Well, it's just like a repetition of suffering and the infliction of pain until finally people go, okay, all right, I'm going to respect this.
That's an interesting. This worries me. If there's a white pill to be found, so I just was writing about this today, right? Okay, for Hobbes, the impulse to defend oneself is a natural passion. It's inborn. It can never go away. It's just part of man's being. And he can't help but want to defend himself from attack, from physical, violent attack or theft or whatever. And so to try to prevent that is tyrannical and unjust, to try to prevent this natural impulse, right? And that's almost the basis of his whole political philosophy is that people have a fear of violent death. They deserve to be protected, and in the state of nature, they have to protect themselves. So their prospects of doing so are kind of dicey in the state of nature. So you enter civil society where there's a Leviathan, a sovereign that will protect them. If there is a white pill, it's that natural impulse cannot be overcome. That the regime we ever have now, I agree. I totally agree that it is hell-bent on punishing you for exercising what I still consider to be your sovereign, natural, unalienable, God-given right to self-defense. If there is a human nature will simply rebel. This will not be allowed to succeed. People can't help it, right? If I see your fist coming at me and I have the ability to block it or do something, I'm going to block it or hit you back. I'm going to do that. And I won't even think about it. It's just a reaction that I'm going to have. And the regime, if it's going to try to make this a universal principle, it either has to totally terraform human nature and to make us something that we're not and have never been, or it's going to fail and we're going to rebel. I don't know what's going to happen because 5-10 years ago, I would have confidently said they can't terraform and remake human nature. Now I sort of scratch my chin because as I get gloomier, as I get older, I go, I wonder, have they found a way to do something that nobody in the past, 3,000 years has figured out how to do? And
a lot of people seem to want into that system. Give me the death pod, give me the external womb, give me the drip feed.
Yes. It could be, though, there's no doubt that we're living through extraordinary times and periods of kind of insane moral panics. They have precedent. We could just be living through one of those before the natural immunities in the human race and the human soul wake up and just start fighting back. Now, I'm not the guy to go to for a whole bottle filled with white pills. For that, you need somebody like Chris Rufo, who I love, by the way. I have nothing against Rufo. Rufo is great. He's more optimistic than I am. So, but that could happen. It could also happen that we're at the end of a kind of overarching civilizational sect. I use the phrase as Machiavelli uses it, right? A kind of combination, civilization, culture, religion, everything, and it's just, it's playing itself out after a few thousand years, and it's dying. But then something else will be reborn. On the blackest pill would be they've done something that every previous philosopher, thinker, theologian would have thought impossible. They've managed to denature humanity itself, and humanity has just decided it wants to either not be human anymore or it wants to die. I really hope the latter is not true and fantastical, and that I will someday be laughed at for having even suggested that as a possibility. I would love that if, like the obituary, when I die, somebody says, Anton once said that it's possible humanity itself had just been overcome with the death wish and there was no way out. Isn't that the dumbest thing anybody ever said? That'd be fantastic if it was proved not true. I would cop to it being the dumbest thing ever said, and I would tell you how relieved I was to have been proved wrong. I'm not to say that I'm asserting it. I'm just saying, what if it's possible?
Big tech and big data have shown us time after time that they're not on our side. And yet, we're giving them access to record our personal lives 24/7 through our phones. Even when your phone is off, the microphones and cameras and location trackers still work. And that's just the tech people. What about your personal security when it comes to the crazy ex, someone stalking you, or even trying to blackmail you? It happens more than you might think. This is why I use the Refuge Ghost Sleeve. It's made in America, from American buffalo leather, and it blocks 5G signals that other Faraday sleeves miss. And it's the only Faraday sleeve that blocks signal and sound. They added sound blocking panels on each side that keep conversations private. This isn't some clunky metal box. It looks cool. It's easy to put your phone in and take out of throughout the day, whenever you want privacy. You can't be too careful these days, and the Refuge Ghost Sleeve can help keep you safe. Visit refugeprivacy.com today. Use code ZERO to save 10% off your order. That's refugeprivacy.com, promo code ZERO for 10% off. Let's look around at the evidence for a collective death wish. You have written, I think, quite eloquently about the need for a revitalized culture, revitalized art. Called you a Renaissance man, not just because you care about the Renaissance, but finance, government. You've been around political philosophy. You have an understanding of how it all kind of fits together, and if one of those big chunks is missing, then it's probably, the regime or the sect is not going to probably be long for this world.
Yeah.
So you look around at art, you look around at culture. It's pretty limp right now. It's lots of people you could blame for it. You could blame the Zoomers, you can blame the Chinese, you could blame TikTok, you could blame the wokies, you can blame tech eating Hollywood and turning everyone into just an avatar who they can license and own for the rest of all perpetuity throughout the universe. Why is it so bad, and how do we turn it around?
Why is it so bad? I guess you mean like the art in particular, why is it so bad? I don't know.
High culture?
I was thinking about, I kind of had this thought just today as I was driving here. So I pretty much always have on one or the other classical music station. So I'm subscribed to Sirius, which is kind of getting a little bit woke and just playing too much stuff. And then there's a terrific Dallas classical station, but they had on something, a piece I wasn't interested. So I click over to Sirius and they start playing the Alban Berg Violin Concerto. Now, like, I'm pretty broad-minded when it comes to classical music. Like, I can get right through Stravinsky, and then some later, you know, Benjamin Britten, Elgar, you know, obviously Rachmaninoff, but temporally even later than Stravinsky. But I got to draw the line at Berg and Schoenberg. I just can't take it. I'm thinking, why would anybody write this? At best, it sounds like this sort of weird movie music, like you're setting the mood as the guy creeps through the hall with a chef's knife.
Yes, this is like atonal.
Yeah, and I just like, what's the? And I guess the one answer is just because everything else had been done.
Yeah,
people thought I gotta try. And you know, part of it does come from the épouter le bourgeois ethos in France in the 19th century, which is you have to shock the bourgeoisie. Tom Wolfe wrote 2 outstanding books on this subject: The Painted Word, 1975, and Bauhaus to Our House, 1981, in which he described, in very comic terms, the kind of reduction of art, meaning basically painting, wall art, you know, into just the expression of dry theory, and architecture into, you know, going from beautiful, sublime, uplifting things to just glass boxes everywhere, or even worse, you know, brutalism, poured concrete structures. And I always thought, God, it would be great if he were to write one about music, but he never did. But maybe part of it is just everything's been done, you know. There's another great piece you can read by Wolfe too, which was from Harper's, I think, in 1989. After the Bonfire of the Vanities was a massive success, you know, Wolfe went on record in the early 70s basically saying the novel is dead. The novel's dead because novelists have just started writing these incredibly solipsistic little, you know, let me tell you about my innermost feeling that had no plot, no substance. They didn't do what they used to do, which was go out, find things, talk to people, report, and present a picture of the world. So like
the 100,000 footed
beast.
The
stalking the billion-footed beast is what it was called. It's like, so having said the novel was dead, then he wrote a novel that was successful, and the Stalking the Billion-Footed Beast was his sort of triumphalist manifesto saying, I told you it could be done, I did it. And in that, he has long passages about how the novel just became more and more circumscribed and narrow and boring, and it just lost its cultural significance. Now, Wolfe asked for and called upon people to go out and, you know, write his kind of novels, and really nobody did. I had the idea to do it a long time ago. I never did it because life happens, and, you know, I had a million reasons not to do it. I wrote about this recently in an online journal called I Am 1776, just saying, you know, Wolfe was right, however long ago it was, 30 years ago. And so if you know what, we should do this now. Well, you know, let's instead of more money for this or that similar, you know, policy paper or policy conference, why don't we just find some young, hungry guys who don't need that much money and give them some money and let's see what they can go out and find and write about. And this response to it was tremendous. Like, I got a lot of mail from people. People talked to me and said, like, that piece, I just dashed it off and thought, man, no one's going to care. You know? Young people were really moved and inspired by that. And I'm hoping somebody picks it up and actually does something.
How about old people? Did they write and say, like, who can I give money to? Like, I got a pot of money right here.
I don't know. That's good. I mean, there is some energy on the right. And I know you're involved in a lot of this, so you know about it. But like stuff like the Passage Prize, they're trying to find talent.
Yeah. They
don't have a ton of money to give away, but they have some. They're trying to find talent and identify it, see who rises to the top. Now, I'm not young. I'm at best middle-aged, but I think I am going to go and write a book, like a Tom Wolfe book next, or not, if not next, like soon, like within a half a year. I'm going to start the research, but it's going to take a long time. Like what Wolfe says is, I remember this very well. He says, it got to the point where writers believed that 95% of good writing is talent in the sacred crucible, like somehow in your brain or in your soul, and 5% was material, what you're writing about. And he says, the real ratio, I suspect, this is Wolfe talking, is more like 65% material and 35% talent in the sacred crucible.
Well, this is an issue.
It's a huge difference, and to get that 65%, you have to do what Tom Wolfe did, which is expensive. This is one of the reasons that I didn't do it when I first had the idea when I was 23. Is like, how do you go and research a book like this while you have a job? You can't. But then if you don't have a job, how do you pay the bills? And I didn't have a patron or anything. I know Wolfe did it by being so popular in the 60s and writing some bestsellers that he got rich enough that he could then just go, all right, I'm just going to go research a book for a few years. And he could afford it.
Well, he also had the psychological fortitude, or at least the inclination. I mean, I think this is a problem. You know, you got a lot of these young guys, and their heart is trying to approach the right place. They understand sort of what the problem is. They want to break through the suck, and they sit behind their laptops in their bedrooms, and they have these sort of, and they're inside their heads, and it's very difficult, for a young person to sort of open the door, go outside, encounter the strangers in their environment.
This is going to tick them off because they're going to think that I'm just an out-of-touch old man criticizing them. But I honestly do believe, even though a lot of it's extremely good and extremely insightful, there's just like too much Twitter commentary and too much Substack opining, right? So I was recently somewhere that I probably can't talk about with people I can't mention who they were, but one of them said that he went and he did a long reported piece on the Blake Masters campaign. And he spent like a month with the Blake Masters campaign, and it was just got packed loads of detail into this piece, right? And it was pretty long, and it was a very big success. He's like, I can't do that, and it wouldn't have cost a ton of money, but the guy's got to have enough money to fly around, to stay at hotels, to feed himself, and all of that. It's like, I can't do that without some kind of backing. In the golden age of journal, when Wolf gets started, it's the '60s. Magazines paid a lot of money. Right, you could make a pretty good living, right?
There was an audience.
Esquire, New Yorker.
There was a mid-tier, sort of generally
educated. That's not true anymore.
Yeah,
but that's the kind of thing I think we need to see more of. And so I just said, let's fund this kind of thing so that we do have talented guys that are writing Substacks and Twitter threads. Instead, I'm sure some of them are probably a little awkward and maybe wouldn't fare that well in the real world, trying to be reporters and talk to people and meet people. But some of them aren't, right? And would be really good at it. Yeah. Let's get them out there.
Yeah. And they might encounter something other than this sort of like doomer romanticism that is just filling so many brains right now. And we all read our Nietzsche, and we all sort of read our to take your pick memoirs of like battle, and it is kind of a bummer that you can't just like go find a spot to do that if that's what you want to do, but maybe you don't need to like go to the jungles of Africa and like kill cannibals in order to like be a man.
I mean, it's just to get back to Wolf, as he said, there's so many astonishing things happening in America at any given time. The amount of material is unbelievably rich. Yeah. What blew him away, he said about the novel, is that from his perspective, the '60s was the most amazing time he'd ever seen, and it offered so much material to so many potential novelists that he was astonished that huge novels weren't written about the hippie movement or about the urban riots or about the space program. So Wolf writes them all, but as nonfiction, right? He writes the Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test, still the best movie about the hippie movement ever. Not movie, sorry, book, but it's nonfiction. It's written in an extremely crazy experimental style, in part because he's describing people tripping on acid all the time. And so he wants to kind of write like that. Right? So he writes the right stuff about the space program. He writes the late in the game. Well, he actually, Radical Chic and Mau Mauing the Flatcatchers about the race riots and the racial strife in the cities and stuff. He's like, where were the novel? And he reports, I have to take him at his word because I don't know, but he reports that there were publishers all over Manhattan, who were salivating, licking their chops at the possibility of getting these novels. They were assuming that there's still enough really ambitious young people who would just bring them something. You never even heard of the guy. You'd be like, I spent 3 years as a truck driver, 2 years chopping wood in Oregon, and then 1 year on a lobster boat in Maine, and now I finished my book and I'm 27, and here it comes to you out of the slush pile, and they realize, oh my God, I've discovered the next whatever. So they never found them. People just were not writing that way anymore.
Yeah. There's like a disinterest in the human that is eating away at the culture, and whatever you want to say about the mixed legacy of Christianity in the West, insofar as yes, certain type of Christian is definitely inclined to say like, what, I'm disinterested in the world, just not going to really participate, but having that disinterest in the human. And preferring to just sort of like, I don't know, just consume sort of flashing images or scroll through things that are just kind of an abstract representation of really human things. You can't really have art if you just, don't really want to leave the house, don't really want to go to a dance, don't want to start a band, don't want to do it.
Yeah. I mean, the only thing I feel like I have any standing to speak to in a way is the writing, because while I am a huge lover of music, and I have a decent grasp of music theory just from taking college level classes on it, like you learn, I don't know, what a semitone scale is, what a mode is, and all of this stuff. And I remember all of that. But if you were to ask me, like, can you write me a 2-minute, partita or whatever, I would have no idea even how to start. There's no part of my brain where I can conceptualize that. But I can sit down with a score open and read it normally. So I don't know where, there's a block in there somewhere. The same thing with like visual arts. I think like every little boy in his heart wants to be good at drawing. I know I did. I really, really wanted to be good at drawing when I was a kid, and I just was bad. I never could control my, everything looked off. It just was like pretty wretched. So I have I'm the classic Philistine who goes to a museum. I know what I like. But I know a little bit about it because I took art history classes, so I sort of know the periods. I know who the major players are. I know what the subject matter. But writing is the one thing that.
And it sounds like you remembered, which is usually not the modal college.
So like I don't know what to tell budding composers or musicians out there. I have no idea like what advice I would give them.
Yeah.
I don't know what I would tell a budding visual artist. But I have a lot of well-meaning, if not particularly helpful advice to young writers.
Well, let's talk about the books. You've got a number of them of varying sizes and subject matters. Start with The Suit.
Yeah.
What happened to suit culture? That seems to be dead, but not entirely dead, but dying.
Yeah, every clothing style has a kind of a life cycle. What's interesting is that this is the first time in a long time where something isn't being born out of the death of the prior one, right? So the suit culture as we know it today is really born in the 20s and 30s. Probably by the time you get to the 1930s, the basic aesthetic is set and it never changes. A few little things change. Lapels get wider, skinnier, ties, blah, 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 but it's more or less set. What killed it was casualization, the advent of business casual, the decline in office work, the techies becoming the most prestigious and powerful people and never wearing them, going on stage at your major earnings conference in a t-shirt or a hoodie or a turtleneck, Jobs and Mark Zuckerberg and all these guys.
Cargo shorts.
Yeah, that was very, very, so the richest, most powerful people running corporations, aren't wearing it and basically saying it's the sure. Wolf, I remember he describes in one of his pieces, the meeting at Il Fornaio in Palo Alto, which is an Italian restaurant where like there's a lot of VC meetings and stuff going on, right? The bean counter, the lawyer, or the investor from the East if he's got on a jacket, much less a tie. And that person is immediately the lowest status person in the room, right? Roll forth that I think in 2000. This is a long time ago. All of that stuff. And then, look, the business casual was a fad that came in. It was like a perk for office workers. Okay, so you don't have to wear a tie you don't have to wear a tie or jacket. You don't have to wear a suit on Friday.
To sort of increase the weekend.
You can kind of head out for the weekend.
In the office.
And that became standard policy at a lot of big companies in the 90s. Yeah. And then many of them killed it after the financial crisis because they kind of thought, well, we're getting back into suits to show that we're serious. Mm-hmm. But the rise of techism, and what I think work from home maybe has killed the suit forever. I noticed the last time I went to an office every day was the White House 2017, 2018. Everybody out on a jacket, a suit and tie. And it'll be the last place where that's true, the highest reaches of government. Before that, I was in corporate Manhattan, not on Wall Street, but in what I consider to be the real Wall Street, because it's where all the big finance firms are. It's basically the east side between 5th and Park, 46th and 57th. And ties were already in steep decline then. But what guys just wore, they had suits, they wore the pants to a suit and an open neck dress shirt. And if it was cold, a jacket, but if it wasn't cold, no jacket. And that's the way, I went to work every day in a jacket and tie, in a suit and tie, because that's just the way I liked it and was comfortable. But I have a feeling it's not coming back in that way. And so the suit's just going to be completely relegated to ceremonial and special occasion functions.
Yeah. Well, you can have formal wear that doesn't just look like a 1930s suit with minor variations, right? You can have some other sort of innovation, but it seems like formal wear as such is like not really surviving.
Yeah, if you mean formal wear, like strictly speaking, black tie.
Well, just like
men.
You are needing to present yourself in an elevated way that conveys some sort of
it's
special
not.
dignity.
It'd be interesting to know. I'm out of touch with this now, but like, what happens at job interviews in Manhattan now?
Yeah.
Like, do you still expected to show up in a suit and tie? There used to be a time where even if your office was business guy or the place you were hiring, or you were interviewing for, it would have been almost a deal killer to show up not in a suit because it meant you're not showing the proper respect for this firm from whom you are asking for something. I don't know if that's true anymore.
Do you think some of this is just like feminization, like Bill Gates wearing his his sweater?
The techies definitely had a definite impact on it for sure. I mean, what happens when you go to do people go to banks and actually meet loan officers in person to borrow money? But in those days, it used to be like you would put on your best clothes.
Oh yeah. I mean, it really wasn't that long ago when you go outside, every man had a hat on.
Yeah.
It's
actually longer than you think.
Yeah, I guess.
It's like you almost have to go back to the 50s for that.
Yeah.
There's a sort of a myth that JFK killed the hat. Not true. Hats were already in decline.
Right.
Actually, the myth it gets it so wrong. They said JFK did not wear a hat to his inauguration, and therefore he killed the hat. In fact, one of the only times JFK ever wore a hat in his life was to his inauguration.
Yeah,
right.
It's the legend.
It's that he didn't wear them the rest of the. Whereas Eisenhower pretty much always had a hat on when he was outdoors. This is just an earlier generation, older school. JFK did not like them, and the '60s was kind of the hat-mageddon in a way. By the end of the '60s, like it's become a thing that you do to make a statement, or it's just your personal style?
Only the pimps wearing the hats. Vladimir Putin called the US dollar's drop in dominance objective and irreversible during the recent BRICS summit in South Africa, as Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa formally agreed to use local currencies instead of the US dollar. It's the first shoe to fall. As demand for the dollar weakens, the buying power of the dollar weakens. That's why Birch Gold Group is busier than ever. Investors and savers are looking to harness the power of physical gold, held in a tax-sheltered IRA. Text James to 989898 for your free info kit on gold. With thousands of happy customers, an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau, and countless 5-star reviews, you can count on Birch Gold to help you navigate transitioning an existing IRA or 401k into an IRA in gold. As the US dollar continues to receive pressure from foreign countries, digital currency, and central banks, arm yourself with information on how to protect your savings. Text James to 989898 to claim your free info kit now. So you wrote a book about suits. You did not write a book about wine. It's early yet, though.
Yeah. I doubt I'll ever write
You're a big wine guy. Are you
Yeah.
enough of a wine guy to write a book, to go full Roger Scruton and just like write
I don't think
a
so.
wine book? No.
I don't.
Why not? You're just going to drink it.
There are a lot of people who just know way. I don't know what I would say that could add to it. You know what I mean? I don't have any unique insights about wine. I could say like these are the great bottles that I've drunk, but that's just sort of solipsistic. And
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think there's the cocktail culture is still going very strong. I think beer culture is like totally out of control with all these IPAs and everything. It seems like the wine.
It is. Beer culture has exploded in a crazy way. I can't keep up
and
with
it. The wine is kind of pulling up the rear, which is I don't know, is a good I got some Mediterranean blood floating around in there somewhere. Like the Mediterranean was always about like that sort of mid-tier like alcohol content. You got your grappa, you got your wine, you got your ouzo, you got your arak, you got limoncello. Things that are stronger than beer, weaker than liquor.
Although grappa is pretty.
Well, yeah, I guess it is pretty strong, but it's not vodka, and it's not gin, and it's not bourbon.
No, I don't know that I don't have anything I think especially unique or interesting to say about wine, so I've never thought about writing about it. So.
Strike one. It's minus 50 Renaissance Man points.
Okay.
Okay.
I mean, I still know something about it.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
That's all right.
If something occurs to me,
you get one pass.
Actually, no. I have written about it in the following sense. I did write. It was just an article, but it was a pretty long article about the history and the changes in Napa Valley. So it's something I wrote for a Claremont Review of Books. 2010, I want to say. It's an old review. And I always meant to revisit it because the guy it actually covered several books, but one of the books, the guy has written several sequels. I can't remember his name. It's like Galloway or Galway or something like that. And I always meant to do a follow-up to take the story kind of into the modern age, and I never did that. I think our friend Charles, who edits the CRB, would like to have that if I ever got around to it.
Would.
I just haven't had to. Part of it is like, Napa went in a direction that I don't like. Like I grew up on Napa wine. Like, please don't picture me like drinking
this explains everything
at 5 years old. But when I got into wine in college, like I went to college very close to Napa Valley, and I could get there fast, and I went all the time. And there's just a lot more stuff in the style that I like. And then, this is a familiar story, but the Parkerization, in other words, the rise of Robert Parker and his certain taste, and how if you got a high score from Parker, your wine would sell out and you could charge a much higher price, so that people started chasing Parker stores and altering the style of the wine.
And chasing scores.
Yeah, chasing scores and making it more fruit forward, less age worthy, and so on. And so a lot of them just went in that direction, and Napa declined from my perspective. There's still a handful, maybe a dozen, maybe not even a dozen, that I like, and the rest of them I don't care about. But
so you can be a wine snob without being wine obsessed.
Yeah.
That's like best of both
But
worlds.
Bordeaux, to me, is still king. A real wine connoisseur would say Burgundy is superior to Bordeaux. That alone makes me suspect in the wine world. Like, you like Bordeaux better than Burgundy? Like, what kind of Philistine are you? I was like, what are you going to do?
So California wines still haven't cracked the top.
There are a few, like I say, that I like a great deal. And I will seek out and I will buy.
And drink.
And drink, yeah. But no, I would put Bordeaux ahead of California.
Interesting. All right, moving down the list of works. Flight 93. It was an essay. It became a slim volume after the Flight 93 election.
Yes.
We are now after the Flight 93 election, and we'll get into the stakes and the coup and everything.
Yeah. So Flight 93 was written and published in September. So almost we're almost at the anniversary. I think this may even be the anniversary. Gosh, I don't know. I think it was September 6th.
Yeah, it's coming up.
It was published.
We're here already.
Yeah, I don't even know what the day is today. The date is today. It's so bad. But 2016. So that is 7 years ago now.
Yeah.
And then after which, Roger Kimball, our friend Roger Kimball, loved it so much that he said, "I want to publish that as a book." But it's only like 5,000 words, a little less. And I had written a follow-up because people, there was a huge uproar over the Flight 93
There's an
election.
outcry.
And I wrote about 8 days later, or published about 8 days later, something I called the restatement on Flight 93. Just basically saying, here are all the things people have said, and I'll answer them thematically without naming names. And then I wrote about a 10,000 word, something that I called, Roger didn't like this, but he let me get away with it. I called it the pre-statement on Flight 93, because it was like, well, if the Flight 93 election is we're in a terrible position and it's all going very badly and, this is a crisis, where's the positive vision? So I laid out a kind of positive vision. It was just meant to be a kind of distillation of, I know people are getting tired of hearing this phrase, but it fits the facts, so I'm just going to use it anyway. It was just kind of meant to be a distillation of West Coast Straussian doctrine. Like, what is nature? What is human nature? What is the basis for political legitimacy? What is natural right? What were the founders' principles? Why are they not? What are the limits to the founders' principles and so on? Where is the left trying to take us right now? And so on. It's a pretty tight compact. I mean, it's 10,000 words, but considering the ground it covers, it was fairly tight. And that came out in, I think, February of 2019. Very slim little volume. It's not much. I like it because it's short. There are, my book after that was
Not short.
And if you want to just get a kind of overview of what we're all about at the Claremont Institute, and I think many of my colleagues at Hillsdale, that's a good first place to go.
Yeah, I don't want to dwell on this for a moment because there was an outcry, and it was like, how dare you invoke this? This is panic. This is you almost inviting a sort of response that is in kind to the hijacking of Flight 93. And then you followed up with a positive vision, and it's I think a lot of the critics who were very upset by the tone. It turns out that they were so upset because you wanted to get across the severity of the crisis and the fact that things were moving in a direction where, whether you want to call it eating the seed corn or cutting into bone, really going after the fundaments of natural right.
I think they were also,
and these are people who don't even believe that that's a thing. And so, on the one hand, they found your rhetoric to be irresponsible, but on the other hand, of course, they were going to find it to be blown out of proportion if they didn't believe that such a thing as natural right existed or that it was really being attacked by the regime.
Right, it's both. Or some don't believe it exists, but I think more of the Never Trump critics of the Flight 93 election do believe natural right exists. Or they, by the way, just for the audience, that's a semi-technical term. It just means the notion that right and wrong, good and evil, just and unjust, legitimate and illegitimate exist by nature independent of men's will. That whatever you think of it doesn't matter. It's there, and reasoned investigation can discern what it is. It's not willed by man, and we're not in. This is the opposite of the Nietzschean territory, right? We don't create right and wrong. We don't say this shall be right and that shall be wrong because I say it. It's you investigate nature, human nature in particular, and you find out what right and wrong are. And the whole concept of natural right if not the phrase, traces to Socrates, although Aristotle does use the phrase explicitly in those exact terms. This is where we get the phrase
Well, but
natural right.
this is sort of the problem that liberals are going through right now. Is I think you're right. A lot of them would say, well, of course I believe that we have these sort of innate rights and whatever, but the pie keeps growing, and suddenly well, we get to add to these things by discovering them or pointing them out or taking pity on someone or sympathizing with them, and well, you deserve to have
and that's a
some
criticism.
more rights. And
that's
then
a
this
criticism
thing keeps blowing up, and so you start out from something that's like supposed to be innate, and then it turns out to be just this.
And that's a criticism that the right-wing opponents of natural rights say. Like, look, once you start declaring rights and saying, and this is what Gottfried has argued, like, well, if the pursuit of happiness is a natural right, then what's to stop anyone from saying my happiness requires X, therefore X must be a right?
And the answer is?
The answer is obviously what he's describing happened. Okay, the list of rights expanded well beyond what, let's say, John Locke or James Madison would have ever countenanced or believed. The question is, was that inevitable? And I think Gottfried and people of that cast of mind or that point of view think it was inevitable, that the whole thing was a mistake from the beginning. You should have seen that it was going to degenerate it into this, or maybe even if you didn't foresee it, now that it has happened, looking back, you have to realize that it was inevitable and that it was a mistake, and we got to start off in a new direction. I think what Locke, all the founders, et cetera, would say is it doesn't have to degenerate into that, right? They believed they could discern a fixed human nature through reasoned investigation that confers these rights over here that are real and knowable by the human mind, and it does not entail these rights over here. Now, that's what they would say. They could have been wrong. Maybe the inevitability. I don't buy the inevitability argument necessarily, but that's certainly what they would say.
There was also the practical situation where you look at the American people, you look at this land mass full of people of a certain kind of culture. You want to improve the regime. You can't just plop something on top of them that doesn't fit, right? You got to go swing with the direction.
But since we're Claremont Institute affiliated, I'm a Claremont Institute senior fellow, and we need to say the following: that the Claremont Institute and its scholars have an answer to this, which is to say the whole idea was corrupted by outside influences. Okay. I don't think there's any doubt that that's true, that the importation of essentially Hegelian philosophy into the West or into our country corrupted the founders' vision via progressivism and so on. But that still raises the question of why was it so? If the founders and the philosophers they relied on had found the permanent truth, why was it so amenable or susceptible to corruption? That's a good question, and the answer may be that everything is susceptible to corruption. Nothing's going to last forever.
The truth is hard. It's hard to have the discipline.
I mean, if you could ask George Washington right now, do you think the United States will go on forever? Like literally forever. This is the best regime. You have finally solved the political problem, and this will never end. I don't think he would say yes to that. I think he was too wise not to know that, no, of course it will eventually fail because human nature is just imperfect.
Well, in a sense, you would almost expect the best regime to be the most vulnerable in some ways to being taken down.
Maybe.
Okay, and that brings us to the stakes.
Yeah.
Big book.
Big book.
Not as despised as Flight 93.
I don't know that it was. I don't think it was widely read. To be perfectly
I don't know.
honest.
I mean, it seemed to be moving around.
Let me put it this way: I had high hopes and ambitions for that book, which were not fulfilled. I suppose every author would say that. Like, if your book doesn't sell a zillion, I mean, sales are one thing. I would have welcomed the sales. It sold okay. I made some good money off that book, and I bought some good wine with the money I made off that book. So there's that. It could be worse. But more than sales, like I was hoping it would really start a conversation on the right, that everybody nominally on the right would feel that they had to respond to it in some way, and they didn't. Like,
Do you think it was like an "oh shucks, he's right," and then kind of like slapping of the shoulder?
I think at least 50% was TLDR. Too long, didn't read.
Right.
It's just like it's this big doorstop. It's 400 pages or whatever. People are just like, who cares? Now, I've heard from a lot of people who did read it that they said they thought it went on too long, and that a third of the material could be, or some, you pick your number, could be cut. Maybe. Of course, I wrote it, I read it, I edited it several times. I did end up, I think when I finished the manuscript, it was 160,000 words. Going back through it just by myself before an editor told me to do anything.
I did cut it. Yeah.
I pared it by 20,000 words. But that's still 140, which is big. I totally agree. But, it said everything I wanted to say. So, I don't know. I'm always accused of writing too long. And I guess ultimately I just don't care.
Would you recant anything from
No.
that book? No.
No.
Now more than ever. the stakes.
Yeah, I mean, if anything, I can say this safely because I'm not going to say how, but like it's written esoterically. There's a lot implied in it that is not said on the surface, which no one's bothered to figure out, or maybe never will.
Do you think that true writing about political matters today has to be esoteric?
Yes.
You got to hide.
But it's
the
a problem.
goodies.
It's a problem, right? Because if we're in an urgent crisis, as I believe we are, writing esoterically for the audience who don't know that phrase, it sort of means like writing between the lines. You have a surface, but then you have a depth that's semi-hidden and that only a very careful reader can understand, which means only a minority of your readers will ever understand. Like the Flight 93 is not particularly esoteric. It's like a call to action. You must do this, right? It's an exhortation. People say it's radical, but like, what does it exhort you to do? Vote, right? These are the same people who talk about our democracy, and they're mad because I wrote an exhortation to vote. But because it wasn't vote for the Democrats, nor was it just a completely banal, just go vote. Doesn't matter. Like I said, no, vote for this guy. That's beyond the pale.
It wasn't to just go get the sticker. It was to actually make a consequential vote.
Make a consequential vote, right? So that's a call to action. So if you're in an urgent situation, you have to, you can't write esoterically because people if everybody doesn't understand it, it's not doing you any good. But the more understandable it is by your friends, then the more understandable it is by your enemies. And so the risk to you personally goes up, and to your side, and to your affiliated institutions. On the other hand, if you do write esoterically, you protect yourself to a degree, you protect your side, your institutions, your friends. But if people don't get it, what good have you really done? I mean, it's one thing to be esoteric in ancient world or the Middle Ages, where you're basically writing for future generations of philosophers out a few centuries. Hey, who cares if nobody really figures you out for 100 years, 200 years? It's okay, as long as the people you need to find it, and they philosophize adequately. You're not trying to reform the world or change the course of things. But if you are trying to change the course of things, you're in a real pickle. I mean, I get at this directly in the review that I did of Regime Change. This book has been knocked around pretty hard in the reviews, I think, and to some extent unfairly, because even though I don't agree with a lot of what Deneen says, and I think there are a lot of begged questions in the text, I admire and appreciate and I'm grateful for the fact that he took this on.
Yeah.
Right? He stood up and he said, we've got a serious problem. We got to start thinking about ways to do fundamental change. Nobody wants to hear that. They want to hear that, like, well, we'll get the right candidate in 2024 and then we'll get everything's back on track. There's nothing fundamentally wrong that requires fundamental change. And it takes courage, and you're going to get beaten up for saying what Deneen said, and I'm glad he did, and I think it's useful, and I think we need more people to do that.
Well, and at the same time, I mean, people don't want to hear that, but another thing people don't want to hear is, well, ultimately we have to actually encounter each other face to face and just start hammering away at this stuff through the practice of Republican politics, small R Republican politics. Because if we don't do it that way, guess what our options are? Yeah. 1, waiting for a Superman who never arrives. 2, aligning with some sort of demagogue. 3, just like blood in the streets. And sure enough, we've got people on the left saying, oh, don't worry, we don't need to do politics. We're just going to create a sacred caste system. Or, oh, we don't need to do politics. We're just going to terraform humanity out of human nature using technology that we control.
Yeah.
And then on the right, you go, oh, no, don't worry. Like the man of destiny will rise out of somewhere or another. And then,
which could happen. I don't rule that out.
Of course it could happen.
I don't rule it out, but it's like,
nobody wants the boring answer,
says,
which is you got to actually just do the politics.
In Prince 13, he says, you should never let yourself fall with the expectation that someone else will pick you up. Okay, that answers that point, I think, pretty. So the man of destiny may emerge, but just like waiting for Godot. This gets back to something I said earlier. And the kids are going to get mad at me, but Twitter Substack, and even the most insightful Twitter Substacks are not going to get it done. You really are going to need to get involved in your local community. And I'm a hypocrite here because I don't do this, right? I don't run for school board. I don't run for county commissioner.
A lot of people live in cities where doing that is just an act of suicide. I don't
do any of that, right? Because I think, first of all, I don't think I'd be very good at it. But to the extent that I have anything to contribute in however many years I have left, the best use of my time, I can make the biggest difference. I can do the best work that I can do in other realms. But if we're going to save humanity, if we're going to save America, if we're going to save ourselves, if we're going to save our civilization or preserve any part of it, this is going to have to be done at a very mundane level by a lot of people. And it's hard work, and there's an element of drudgery to it. And it's much more fun and somehow satisfying to, do Twitter Substack. But guys, you're not going to make it if that's all you do. I don't think. I sadly don't think that.
Well, I think you're right. We should spend at least a minute here on the coming coup.
Yeah.
The coup that came.
Yeah.
The coup that was. Obviously, there's all kinds of persistent nonsense about what magic words you can and cannot say when discussing the election situation. I've been thinking a lot about like legal but unjust. So there's asset forfeiture. Yeah. Right, which is I'm a cop and I see you doing something that seems suspicious to me for whatever reason. I pull you over, and even before I get you downtown, even before I slap the cuffs on, I am just like cleaning you out. I'm taking all of the property that you have on you that I've encountered. It's impounded. Maybe me and my friends enjoy it later on. There are all kinds of tales of corruption. You can back the blue and still realize that like asset forfeiture, like not just. It's not right, but it's legal. Right. And there are ways to do it, and it's a prevalent practice, and it is reshaping the way criminal justice is done.
So the phrase
you can see where I'm going with
the phrase that I use for the 2020 election is that it was pre-rigged. So I'm a complete believer in the Molly Hemingway book Rigged, in which she doesn't go into any of the controversies that have swirled since the vote took place, Dominion voting or this or that. She just doesn't talk about it. So let's look at all the things they did in advance to ensure that Donald Trump could not win that election. And that book did well. And to me, it's the definitive account. And what's hilarious is Molly Hemingway, Molly Mollie. Well, there's another Molly with a Y named Molly Ball who wrote the exact same thing in the February 2021 Time magazine, in which she said how a coalition, like a conspiracy of elites, fortified the 2020 election. And she basically describes how governments, NGOs, foundations, Zuckerbucks, and all these people and the media and tech companies got together to make sure that like certain information would be censored, laws would be changed, mail-in ballots would be allowed, ballot harvesting would be allowed, a get out the vote operation would take place only in Democratic neighborhoods, and all to make sure that Trump lost and Biden won. And this is great. They basically tell exactly the same story, but when Molly Hemingway says it because she's against it, that's terrible. And it didn't happen, and it's bad. Right. When Molly Ball says it because she's for it, it's great. And we're so glad it happened, and isn't it wonderful? The tale of two Mollys. 30 seconds. What is happening to us? What's next? Where are we going to be in a year from now? A year from now will be September of 2024. I assume Trump will be the nominee. I assume we will be in the last days of a presidential campaign. Maybe Biden will be the nominee, maybe Biden won't. I don't know, hard to say. It's hard for me, I'm sorry to say this, people are gonna get mad and say that I'm being disloyal or whatever. It's hard for me to imagine Trump winning because I think the institutional balance of power is so against him. Everything they did to pre-rig 2020 will still be in place in 2024 and will be fortified with even more fortification. And I don't see a sufficient effort or accomplishments on the Trump side or on the Republican side to overcome that. So I assume we're going to get 4 more years of whatever it is we have now. And so we beat on. That is literally all the time that we have. Thank you, Michael. At least until next time, that's all we've got. If you found this conversation meaningful, please consider becoming a Blaze TV subscriber to help us create more content. Yum, yum. Go to blazetv.com. Use the code ZEROHOUR20, ZEROHOUR20, for $20 off your first year of Blaze TV. This is Zero Hour. I am James Poulos, and may God have mercy on us all.